The court, being duly advised, finds the defendant is in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death.
Do you have any idea what their defense is going to be, given the fact that the judge has basically taken away their defense?
Am I the only person in the world talking about attacking the timeline, attacking the timeline, attacking the timeline, attacking the timeline?
Do you have any idea what their defense is going to be, given the fact that the judge has basically taken away their defense? Taken away their defense.
Like, am I in crazy? 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 Like, am I in crazy?
Challenge the timeline of the murders.
Talking about attacking the timeline.
What's the strategy today? Winning.
Whose motherfucking hair is that?
What's the strategy today? Winning.
The consensus has been challenge the timeline of the murders. Challenge the timeline of the murders.
It's so cozy after 10 o'clock. It's like cozy. There's 12 of us. I kind of dig it. I found a video that I hadn't seen that was quite good in terms of like a recap from the hearings. It's very short.
Well, today we heard all about statements that Richard Allen's psychologist and police say that he has made in prison while awaiting trial. According to the state, Allen has confessed over 60 times to different people that he killed Libby German and Abby Williams. Now, Allen's defense team says he made those confessions after a psychotic breakdown because of how he was being treated in custody, and they do not want a jury to hear about those confessions during trial. It's up to Judge Francis Gall to decide if a jury will. Investigators testified Tuesday since his arrest, Richard Allen's made at least 670 phone calls. All of them, except the ones to his attorneys, have been recorded and monitored by investigators. ISP Detective Brian Harshman testified that in calls Allen made to his wife and mother, he confessed to killing Abby and Libby, including details that only a person involved with the crime would know, and offered a motive. According to Harshman, Allen's confession started in April 2023, a month after Allen started reading the Bible and said he'd found God and Jesus. Harshman said most of Allen's confessions came then over the next 3 months, slowing down in July. That's the same time period Allen's psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla, testified Allen's mental health was, quote, extremely poor, critical, and deteriorating, saying there was, quote, no doubt he had serious mental illness around that time, brought on by stress. Dr. Wallace said Allen spent much of his time in solitary confinement, something that could have contributed to his deteriorating mental health, recalling Allen repeatedly slamming his head into the walls and door of his cell, leading staff to make a decision to inject him with drugs to calm him down. Walla also told the court she helped Allen call his wife in May 2023 and stepped out of the room. When she came back in, Walla said Allen asked to call his wife again so he could confess. Allen's defense team doesn't want a jury to hear any of Allen's confessions, claiming they were coerced because of the conditions Allen was living under, including, they say, harassment from other inmates who monitored and reported his behavior, and near constant solitary confinement they believe led to Allen's mental breakdown. So this was a full day of arguments on both sides about whether a jury should hear about Allen's confessions during trial. They will sum up their final arguments on that matter. The state wants to limit what Allen's defense team can say to a jury regarding possible alternate suspects and motives during the trial. The defense says those kind of limitations on what they could say would violate Allen's constitutional rights.
So I'm going to really quick run through why all of the statements made by Richard Allen while in the custody of the Department of Corrections should be inadmissible. I'm going to start with, we've all seen this document like ad nauseum, shown this document, but I want to show it again. Here is our April 5th, 2023 emergency motion to modify safekeeping order filed by Rick Allen's attorneys. April 4th, 2023, the day after the defense went to visit Rick because they had been informed by his wife, Kathy, that he was psychotic, basically, losing his mind. And they filed this motion requesting that the court modify the safekeeping order that Diener ordered on November 3rd, 2022, mere minutes before recusing himself forever from the case. Prior to counsel being assigned to Mr. Allen, all decisions regarding Mr. Allen's detention were made prior to counsel being assigned to Mr. Allen to speak on his behalf. No formal hearing regarding the sheriff's safekeeping requests have ever been conducted as of the date of this filing. The safekeeping order is issued on November 3rd, 2022. However, we know from going through the filings and very carefully looking at Mr. Allen's undated letter that he sent to the Carroll County Circuit Court pleading for an attorney. This is when he threw himself at the mercy of the court, if we remember that. His letter is mailed at least before November 1st. So that means it could have been written and mailed the 28th, like 29th, 30th, 31st of October, because it arrived in Indianapolis at the U.S. Post Office on November 1st, 2022. And that letter was sent from the White County Jail where Mr. Allen was being held. On that envelope is a stamp with a barcode. That letter goes back to the White County Jail. It does not get sent to the Carroll Circuit Court. And that is because there was a mail stop ordered for Mr. Allen's mail. So it takes 1 day for mail to get to Indianapolis once it leaves its local facility. So that means that he would have sent this letter on October 31st, the day that Doug Carter and the Unified Command Task Force told the world that Richard Allen, in no uncertain terms, killed Abby and Libby. And put a big picture of his face up on the screen. I would probably be writing a letter throwing myself at the mercy of the court and anyone else who would listen too. Despite the fact that Mr. Allen had no attorneys, he did not have counsel from the time that he authored that letter on the 31st until at least 2 weeks later. In the span of that time, the sheriff issues a safekeeping motion. He files one with the court, which we know was actually authored by Benjamin Diener, as testified to by Sheriff Lesenby during one of the hearings. I believe during the June 2023 hearing, maybe. And then the judge, Benjamin Diener, despite the fact that Rick was without counsel, orders Rick to DOC custody under safekeeping. This document, by the way, Judge Diener's order granting safekeeping order, was created around 10 a.m., 30 minutes after Lesenby filed his request. Judge Diener recuses himself from the case. On that very same day, Jerry Holman gives the RDC, which is the central office for DOC, I don't know what it's called, orders the conditions of his detention, 24/7 surveillance in his cell, suicide watch restrictions and protocols. Fran Gull is assigned to the case, and she does not appoint attorneys to Mr. Allen for 10 days. So for 10 days, Rick is without attorneys, even after Judge Francis Gull is appointed. I don't know what that's about. And the letter that Rick mailed on the 31st of October was not received and entered by the Carroll Circuit Court until the 9th. So it took 10 days for that letter to get from White County to Carroll County. It's not far. I started to talk about this with Michael and Travis, and then there was just so much to talk about. I feel like I got lost in the sauce, but I want to talk about safekeeping. You're going to be so tired of hearing me say that word, but it's important. This is the motion that the sheriff filed that we know was mostly authored by the judge. So Judge Diener authored and then ruled on his own safekeeping motion. Potential safety and security concerns exist. Potential safety and security concerns exist. Notice that there are no specific safety and security concerns provided here by the sheriff. He just says that there's potential safety and security concerns because it's a high-profile case. Okay. Because of the aforementioned reasons, which, by the way, he didn't provide any. All he said was that this is a high-profile case. That's literally the only thing. It's high-profile, and that makes me nervous. I'm nervous. And because of that, I can't provide the services or attention or supervision necessary to protect and meet his needs. So the remedy in the safekeeping statute for a county sheriff or jail not having adequate resources or infrastructure to house an inmate is not a reason for a safekeeping order. It's not one of the components that must be met or the criteria that have to be met. So that's not a reason. Pursuant to Indiana Code, and here's the code. I respectfully request the court an order approving the transfer of the defendant to DOC. They have already agreed to accept custody of him. And we knew that because we knew already on October 28th, 2022, that DOC, I didn't even know what safekeeping was, but I have a message, Russ McQuaid, on October 28th that says, Sheriff Lesenby says safekeeping DOC. I was like, huh? I don't know what that means. That meant nothing to me at the time. So this is the code that Tobe cites. Emergency transfer of certain jail inmates. Inmates in county jail in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death, or represents substantial threat to safety of others. Upon a motion by the sheriff, attorney, defendant, counsel, or AG or court, alleging that an inmate in the jail awaiting trial is in danger of serious bodily injury or death, or represents a substantial threat to safety of to others, the court shall determine whether the inmate is in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death, or represents a substantial threat to others. If the court finds that the inmate is in danger of serious bodily injury or death, it shall order the sheriff to transfer the inmate to another county jail or to a facility of the DOC designated by the DOC commissioner suitable for the confinement. Notice it says jail. There was no reason for Rick to be transferred to DOC custody. And we know that they didn't even try to find accommodations for Rick in a county jail facility, which would have been the only appropriate setting for a pretrial defendant. They went straight to DOC. So he cites this. None of this is true. The court has to find. There has to be a showing, and then the court will find, based on that showing, that there exists imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death. I don't know why I can't say that. And all he said was like, oh, I'm a little nervous about this. And then he says, as provided by this code, which is the same code, different subsection, I'll be responsible for transporting him. Didn't they say one of the reasons they needed safekeeping was because they didn't have the resources and capacity to transport him? So when an inmate's transferred, the sheriff shall be responsible for transporting to and from the other facility. If he's unable to, the sheriff can request assistance from other law enforcement. Diener Wiener. Here's his court order. Entered 30 minutes after the motion is filed. The court being duly advised finds the defendant is an inmate awaiting trial and is in imminent danger. We don't know how he found that. He just found it. There was no proof offered. There was no burden on the sheriff or state to prove that Rick was in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death. And actually, Benjamin Diener, the Honorable, even says outright, this finding is not predicated on any acts or alleged acts of the defendant since the arrest, rather on a toxic and harmful insistence on public information about the defendant and this case. This finding is not predicated on any acts or alleged acts. This finding is not based on anything. This finding is based on the fact that the public is annoying me, asking me for info about this defendant. And what if they get really impatient? And what if they get really mean? And what if an angry mob forms demanding that we release the PCA? So that's not a safekeeping reason. In general, this court has 30 days to rule on any motion filed by a party. Yet, concurrent to the actual case naturally occurring, this judicial officer keeps getting direct requests from non-parties for public information, claiming that this officer has 7 days or 1 day when hand-delivered to respond to requests or face litigation. Have we ever seen this before in an order? I've never seen an exclamation point. This Yelp reviewer, he's a Yelp reviewer. If Judge Diener was not such a clear and present danger to the safety and due process and freedom and wellness and aliveness of people around him, He would be by far the funniest character in this entire saga. He's hilarious. Except he's not, because he's terrifying. The public's bloodlust for information before it exists is extremely dangerous. All public servants administering this action don't feel safe and are not protected. Diener's like, shield me from this storm. Shield me. The public's bloodlust for information before it exists is extremely dangerous. I don't know what that means. We still don't know what that means. Does that mean that there is no PCA yet? It doesn't exist? That's weird. That's suspicious. The Carroll County Sheriff has limited resources to conduct its base operations, let alone any duties mandated by the court. All defendants and all actions are presumed innocent. Okay. All public information will be available the second it exists. Will it? All right. He goes on and on and on. The defendant indicated at his initial hearing an intention to hire counsel. He's reminded he must retain counsel within 20 days. Here's the problem. He asked you for counsel 3 days ago, and you didn't get his letter because you put a mail stop on his mail, so he can't even ask you for an attorney. You're reminded he's entitled to court-appointed counsel, and the defendant will be examined upon request, unless, of course, defendant's request is hampered by a mail block and a shuffle between county and state facilities. The court notes for the public that when the defendant appeared for the initial hearing, he was clad in protective gear. That was not to protect him from the court. That was to protect defendant from the public. Then Sheriff Lesenby, now Sheriff Liggett, and Warden Gallup, who all stated in their sworn testimony that there were never any threats to or against the defendant or the facilities where he was housed. Never. Never, 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 never. Never. Not once did anyone threaten Rick or the facility holding Rick. Until a finding of guilt or judgment of conviction occurs in any case, judgment must be reserved and the presumption of innocence must be preserved and respected. So why are you sending him to the Department of Corrections? The defendant is actually entitled to notice when it comes to safekeeping. Believe it or not, the defendant is entitled to notice regarding everything. Every order that is issued in his case, he's entitled to notice. Unless, of course, you kept him from him getting an attorney, you don't even probably worry about notifying him. You can't notify his attorneys because he doesn't have any. Oy. Was the shock belt protecting Rick from the public? It's a good question. It wasn't protecting him. They want us to know that the shock belt and the chains were not protecting Rick from the court. Like, who would have thought that it was? That's a weird thing to say, Benny. Diener knew that Rick was not going to be able to afford counsel. I also think that's true. There's been a lot of conversation had about the recent motion to certify court order for interlocutory appeal. I want to look at it again because I think that maybe I want to give a little bit more credit to Rick's attorneys because they have been banging the drum of due process and safekeeping since at least April 2023. They've brought it up so many times. This is the motion for this is the interlocutory appeal. I just want to find the part where they talk about safekeeping. Okay. On November 3rd, 2022, Judge Benjamin Diener issued a safekeeping order, which resulted in defendant Allen's immediate transfer to a maximum security Indiana Department of Correction confinement facility, wherein he was detained in solitary confinement for a period of nearly 13 months. Everybody hear that? 13 months. It's a long time. Defendant Allen was not afforded a due process hearing regarding his detention until June 2023, nearly 8 months after he was locked away in solitary confinement. Throughout the course of defendant Allen's detention, the state of Indiana began offering up discovery in the form of incriminating statements made by Allen to prison guards, inmate companions, the warden, his treating psychologist, and his family members. Defendant Allen moved to suppress the admissibility of said statements on the basis that those statements were involuntary and thus obtained in violation of his 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights under U.S. Constitution and under the Indiana Constitution. Here we go. 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights were violated. What more do they need to say in a motion to certify before a judge when they know she's literally going to deny it anyway? It wouldn't matter what they said. They could have filed a 150-page motion about all the ways that it wouldn't have made a difference. So on August 28th, the court issued an order denying the defendant's request to suppress statements and held in totality. The statements given by the defendant were not coerced, were voluntary, and were not the result of interrogation of the state nor its actors, nor the product nor the product of his confinement. The environment that the state literally created for him produced and facilitated and elicited these statements because it produced and elicited his psychosis. The issues that need to be addressed are: was Richard Allen denied his right to due process under state and federal conditions when he was detained in solitary without having been afforded a timely hearing on the state's motion for safekeeping? So pause, because safekeeping is interesting in Indiana. This is the statute. This is what we've got for safekeeping in Indiana. The court shall determine whether or not there's an imminent danger. And we know that the sheriff said there's not. There's just potential for stuff. And the judge said there's not. This is not based on anything that the defendant did or anything that it actually exists. It's just based on bloodlust. What bloodlust? Give us an example, Benjamin. Give us an example of a threat, or not even just a threat, because a threat's not enough. That doesn't mean that Rick Allen is in imminent danger or that the sheriff is in imminent danger. The question, I think, is, does that really rise to the level of imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death? And then, if the court finds that they are in danger of such, they can order the sheriff to transfer the inmate to another county jail or a facility. So why DOC? The inmate or receiving authority is okay, this is important. Here it is. The inmate or receiving authority is entitled to a post-transfer hearing upon request. The inmate may refuse a safekeeping transfer if the only issue is his personal safety. So even if the court decided legitimately, based on actual evidence, not just bloodlust, that there was a safety risk to Rick Allen because of the bloodlust, he could still refuse a transfer. And regardless, he was entitled to a hearing. I guarantee you they never gave him that option. And he didn't know that because he didn't have a attorney when they did this. So that is pretty clear to me. Were his rights to due process under this, at least state? Okay, so we already know that his rights to due process were violated under state constitution. B, did the effects of defendant Allen's extended solitary confinement render statements made by him to all of the people involuntary and therefore inadmissible? They're not arguing coercion here. This is not the coercion argument. This is just involuntary. Involuntary can mean coercion. Certainly. Certainly coercion would fall under the involuntariness umbrella. But he didn't say coercion. He said involuntary. Meaning, if I am gravely disabled due to severe mental illness and I am diagnosed with psychosis, sure, nobody's physically forcing me to confess or make statements, but I'm not in the driver's seat. It's just, I cannot believe that this is even a question. Were the statements allegedly given by defendant Allen to the psychologist privileged? Let's see. Except as otherwise provided by the statute, the following persons shall not be required to testify regarding the following communications: attorneys, physicians, as to matters communicated to them by patients in the course of their professional business, clergymen. Interesting. Well, where's the letter that he allegedly wrote? So it's not in debate that he got no hearings necessarily. What's in debate was the deprivation of hearing and not allowing him to even refuse or decline or object to the safekeeping transfer. Was that a violation of due process? Yeah, this is wild. Notice that of all the people, these motherfuckers literally found loopholes and slimy, snaky ways to violate every single one of these subcategories. Ready? Number 1, attorneys. As to confidential communications made to them in the course of their professional business. Well, they were filming his attorney meetings. Wow. That's a violation. 2, physicians. They were literally going to his visits, his doctor, medical, and psych visits. 2 guards were in the room with him. That's not allowed. 3, clergymen. We keep hearing about him writing a letter to the fucking chaplain or something. Why do we know about that? And where's the letter? And what the fuck's up with the chaplain, clergy person, whoever he or she was? And husband and wife. Well, they got Rick talking to Kathy on a recorded line, even though he was psychotic at the time. And they sure stood in the room with him in a quiet visitation room with nobody else there, 2 feet away, depriving them of water. Every single person that would otherwise not be required to testify, whose communication with Rick should and would have been privileged, i.e., the state doesn't get to know about it, and if they know about it, they shouldn't, and if they do, they can't use it. However, they have managed to violate every one. The fix is in. Next part. The order involves a substantial question of law that could be resolved on appeal. His incriminating statements stemmed from a most unique detention circumstance. Allen nor his counsel were given no choice in the matter. This is when I stood up last time. If the Court of Appeals found that his due process rights were violated through safekeeping, every thing that came out of his mouth in DOC would be inadmissible, period. Because it would be no different than kicking the front door down of a veteran playing paintball, seizing all his with no probable cause, and then trying to enter all that into evidence in a case against him. The judge would be like, no way. You don't get to do that. That's not how we operate here. 100%. They literally just said this has literally never happened in the state of Indiana because Carroll County is Whoville. The issue of first impression here is whether or not his due process rights were violated. Does the safekeeping statute require the court to conduct a hearing? Defendant Allen is unaware of any rulings in the state of Indiana that address this issue. It's never happened before, which is probably why it's like was so easy for them to use this loophole and violate it. And if the Court of Appeals were to find that his due process rights were violated, then the admissibility of his statements and all other evidence stemming from his wrongful detention would be inadmissible. No wonder the state objected to the motion to certify, because all of the evidence, quote unquote evidence that they had against Rick would be garbage. Catastrophe says 11/21/2023 is when the Gull Media blasts the backdate hospital stay, which actually occurred on November 2nd. Yeah, isn't it interesting that they waited 20 days to report on her hospitalization? She was back to work already when they started reporting on it. I know a lot of us got dragged to hell and back for giving the media a hard time for how they reported on that. Fine. That was some bullshit. That was some PR bullshit. Face-saving, public manipulation if I've ever seen it. So the day after the in-camera hearing, aka the secret in-chambers ambush, is released, the transcript of the ambush is released, she's like, I'm really sick. It's so stupid. Girl. Back to defense daddy Rosie. They love the defense daddies. Yeah. No shit. If the court were to find in defendant Allen's favor regarding the safekeeping due process violations, then all of his statements and anything else obtained would be inadmissible, i.e. Fruit Loops of the poisonous fruit tree. We've been hearing that, they could have gone a little further with their motion to certify. They could have included blah, 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 blah. I'm sure all of that's true. I'm also certain it wouldn't matter. In a billion years, never would Judge Gull ever grant certification of an order for the purposes of an interlocutory appeal, which would reverse her orders. No, it wouldn't happen. It's a stupid system anyway, because why would they certify an order for interlocutory appeal? Because they're just admitting that they erred. It's just counterintuitive, the fact that the judge has to certify it before it can go anywhere. However, that's the way it works in Indiana. Inevitably, because of all the there's been delay after delay after delay after delay, meaning the state has had all this time to just keep finagling and messing around and concocting and creating and building their bullshit case around defendant Rick Allen. God almighty. I really like this motion to certify. I thought it was short and sweet and to the point, and they knew she was going to deny it anyway. So Jamie says, I still cannot believe that Judge Gull put herself on the record saying she hadn't even read the Franks memo, and then she ruled on it. She's like, I haven't even read it, but by the way, that thing was full of fucking lies. Did you read it or not, Fran? The main thing I really wanted to pop off about is Walla, because there's something specific that happened last week with the transcript for Walla. And actually, Kara and Maggie already successfully filed an OA dealing with that exact issue, which is, it doesn't matter if there's an agreement of the parties. The judge cannot hide something that is public record from the public record. It doesn't matter if the parties agree. It doesn't matter. It's not their call. You cannot hide a transcript from a public hearing that already occurred. Yeah, it was interesting to see her just encased with Carroll County deputies. Like, what? Come on. And yet, the family members of the defendant, two women, Kathy and Janice, who had to walk blocks away to their car because they got rid of all the parking because they hate the public. They just hate the public. They want to inconvenience the public at all costs. Had to walk to their car alone. Meanwhile, the psychologist, the state actor, gets escorted by over half a dozen Carroll County deputies. Really cool, guys. Great. Is she still in the Defense Diaries group, Sleuthie? Woman Doing Impossible Things says, I'm mad at Walla. I'll go one step further. I'm so triggered when we talk about her. I'm so ashamed. I am ashamed to even... The treasonous betrayal. Okay. Safekeeping. So remember, y'all, there was this heavily protected emergency hearing that was held on April 14th, 2023. And this was the hearing where they decided that Rick was experiencing severe mental illness and that he did meet the criteria of grave disability and involuntary injections of antipsychotic, psychotropics. It was determined that they would giving him involuntary meds. Yet somehow they also determined in that same hearing that he did not need to be transferred to a more appropriate facility or setting. So yes, he's gravely disabled and severely mentally ill to the point where he needs involuntary injections of an antipsychotic medication. However, not gravely disabled enough to be transferred to a medical facility or a DOC facility even that was equipped to handle somebody that was experiencing grave disability and acute severe mental illness. And they did not let anybody know about this hearing except, please hold, because we're going to get there. This is the hearing where Dr. Walla, DOC staff, etc., decided to continue holding Rick in the restricted housing unit at Westville, in spite of very clear, extensively litigated policies protecting inmates with severe mental illness from being held in restricted housing for more than 30 days. This critical hearing was literally held the day after the IPAS lawsuit versus DOC, the day after the stipulated settlement agreement expired. This settlement would have protected Rick from being kept in the restricted housing unit, and it likely would have seen him transferred out of Westville. What this settlement agreement did, not only did it lead to the implementation of statewide DOC policies protecting severely mental ill inmates, but it also gave the inmates that were having their rights violated in this way recourse where they could report DOC to IPAS. It gave them an entity to report violations to, and IPAS would actually do something about it. There was a mechanism for accountability and to preserve and protect the rights of the mentally ill inmates. So the emergency hearing where Walla and IDOC staff determined that Rick would receive involuntary medication yet remain in restricted housing unit happened on the 14th. The settlement agreement, the expiration date was the 13th. Prosecutor McClellan filed his response to the defense's emergency motion to modify Rick's safekeeping. In his response, McClellan admits to having direct knowledge of the emergency hearing that was set to occur that very day. It's abundantly concerning that the state was made aware that this hearing was even happening at all, let alone specific findings and decisions from the hearing, which he later completely misrepresents to the judge. This is a direct quote from this motion he files on the 14th. The state has been made aware that the defendant is being evaluated at 10 a.m. on April 14th, 2023, to assess his mental health needs, and the state believes it's important to see the results of that testing before a decision is made. Who the made Nick McClellan aware of a confidential emergency hearing. Who tipped him off to this? And in what fucking universe does he actually think that he gets to see the results of that testing? Oh, wait. He did. Because at no point did anybody protect Rick Allen's right to privacy. What's weird about this is that the hearing is scheduled to take place at 10 o'clock on 4/14. The prosecutor files his response on the 14th of April. 14th. So let me get this straight. All right, let me get this straight. The prosecutor says, I've just been made aware of a hearing that's going to take place on the 14th at 10 a.m. Look, homeboy authored this on the 14th of April. And he had the audacity to say, the state has been made aware that the defendant's being evaluated at 10 o'clock on April 14th. So you're filing this on April 14th when? At 9? 8? And then, not only did he file that on the same day as the hearing, but Judge Gohl, she is just on top of shit back then, because she also issued an order the same day, April 14th. I'm going to keep that right where he is. I'm not moving that pretrial inmate. What is going on? Wait, hold on. I got to share this. Oh, this is so funny. This is called Dick McClellan. This is called Dick McClellan. Dick McClellan filing three separate motions. The order was Phil to produce employment records from CV. Wait. I forgot about this. Oh my god. Dick McClellan filed 3 separate motions ordering Westfield to produce Rick's employment records. So obviously, he made mistakes in his filings, but that made me laugh. Okay. So this is his stupid motion for leave. God damn it. Wait. Mother. It's the time of the evening where we don't know what's going to happen. Dick McClellan. I don't know why that's making me laugh so hard. Oh my god, he's so stupid. That man is so stupid. God damn. Okay, are y'all still with me? I swear I'm gonna get my life together. Okay, God. So, comes now. Dick McClellan. So this is one of the versions of the modified, amended, altered PCA, I guess. He's asking for mental health records. Why he needs to include the probable cause affidavit again, I don't know. But this says, any and all records any and all records for Rick Allen associated with his stay as an inmate. While working the Delphi investigation, the Sheriff's Department Detective Tony Liggett developed information that he was involved. What does that have to do with anything? Okay, so blah, blah. Here's the PCA that at this point, it's April? He authored a probable cause affidavit to subpoena third-party mental health records of the defendant from DOC. That's a weird thing to do. Upon his arrival at the facility, we're talking about the crime, we're talking about the charges being filed on October 28th. And then all of a sudden, he says he was moved to the Westfield Correctional Facility. He's been in the facility since November. When he entered, he was placed in segregation for his protection. In the segregation unit, his cell is equipped with a video recorder. There are also logs indicating when he leaves and for what purposes. He's also seen by medical providers, mental health specialists to evaluate his condition. He can use his tablet. Upon his arrival, he was placed on suicide watch because of certain statements he made about harming himself. We've seen nothing that proves that he ever needed, like, we don't know what he said, and nor should we, because it's not fucking relevant to anything except Nick is trying to make it evidentiary. Exactly. This is what they do. It's not even just a press release. These are calls to action. Nick McClelland, he releases calls to action to the public, to DOC. Yes, he deputizes state actors to act on behalf of the state for some delusional personal cause mission to help the state. This is insane. Throughout his stay, Rick's mental health improved to the point that he was taken off suicide watch. Was he? Because we also can't find any proof of that. DB says, this is like Nick McClelland saying, get him, boys. Exactly. On April 3rd, all of a sudden, we don't know what happened. On April 3rd, he made a phone call to his wife. He admits several times to killing Abby and Libby. Okay. Investigators had the phone call transcribed, and the transcription confirms that Rick Allen admits he committed the murders of Abby and Libby. He admits several times that he committed the offenses as charged. Honey, I committed the offenses as charged. What did he really say? Why don't you play us the recording? Because I bet you it was psychotic rambling. Soon after, attorneys for Richard Allen filed an emergency motion. In that motion, they say his mental state has declined. Here it is, made aware. This is what started me on this fucking thing. Defense has also challenged that his treatment is unconstitutional. Soon after, investigators were made aware by the warden that Rick Allen was beginning to act strangely. So I wonder who it was. That made aware the state about this April hearing. Because we know the warden made the state aware of Rick's strange behavior. Is the warden making the state aware of other things? Listen, okay. Ready? Rick Allen would go days on end refusing to sleep, refusing to eat, and refusing to sleep. Hold that thought. Because the legal standard of grave disability, it's a person's inability to provide for their basic needs. An example of grave disability might be a person refusing to eat because of delusions about food, refusing to sleep, auditory hallucinations. Psychosis is torture. I'm just showing this article. I'll share it somewhere else because it's good. And it helped me understand. Dr. Wall is using words like grave disability. That's not just her being like, oh, he's gravely disabled because she has like a good vocabulary. That's her using a legal standard. It's a classification of severity of an illness. When someone who is experiencing psychosis floods a cell or throws bodily fluids at staff, custody staff might be trained to respond with punitive measures, disciplinary charges, or restrictive housing, whereas mental health staff might want to further evaluate and treat him. Even when referred for involuntary psych care, incarcerated people who meet grave disability criteria are often so ill that they don't understand or accept the need for treatment. They might go along with or not resist psychiatric care. However, some might refuse any treatment, even as their behaviors place them at risk of victimization, including violence from those around them. Involuntary psychiatric hospitalization. For correctional facilities that don't have those capabilities, involuntary psychiatric hospitalization for patients who meet grave disability criteria typically requires transfer to outside facilities. Yeah, no shit. That's usually what Westville did, except in this instance, they just decided that the safekeeping order was going to trump his, his constitutional right. So, Rosie, one of the things that Judge Gull took issue with, one of the reasons that she found him to be grossly negligent and incompetent and compromised, is that he filed a tort notice against the DOC on April 18th, 2023. So he knows in April 2023 that his defendant, his client, is getting by DOC. He's like, this ain't good. Rosie filed an Indiana tort claims notice. The claimant is Richard Allen. Date of loss, October 28th through the date of this notice. Location, so this includes the Carroll County Jail, the White County Jail, and the Indiana DOC Westville, which were the three facilities that he had been housed at. You are hereby notified that Richard Allen is asserting a claim against all those listed above. The Indiana Political Subdivision Risk Management Commission, the Attorney General Todd Rokita, Nicholas McClelland, the Indiana DOC, former Carroll County Sheriff Tobe Lesenby, Acting Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett, and Carroll County Sheriff's Department. As a result of the persons and or agents whose names are not now known and who acted on behalf of the above agencies. So he's already calling out these entities right here. Let's call these the state. This is the state of Indiana, right? The case of the state of Indiana versus Richard Allen. Everybody listed here qualifies as the state. And then anybody who acted on behalf of the state, on behalf of the above agencies, for the injuries and damages he sustained and continues to sustain from his unlawful incarceration associated with the criminal case number, wherein Mr. Allen was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. In addition to being unlawfully detained, he's been inhumanely incarcerated in a maximum security segregation unit within the DOC pending trial. It is our opinion that the above named agencies and or entities are the proximate cause of this incident. They are asserting the claim that they're making in their request to certify for interlocutory appeal. They are already calling it out in April. They're saying, this is your fault. You are the proximate cause of Rick Allen's injury. The injury to his psyche, his physical body, and the injury to his freedom, his protection against self-incrimination, his due process rights, the injury to his defense. You are responsible. You are the proximate cause of that. The purpose of this letter is to inform you of our client's claims against you pursuant to Indiana Tort Claims Act. The full amount of damages sought on behalf, unknown. When this information becomes available, we'll promptly forward it to you. If for any reason you feel that the above notice doesn't constitute full and complete notice, let us know. Contact us immediately. We'll provide whatever additional information is necessary. So Rosie is doing a really responsible, ethical, competent. He's acting in the best interest to protect his client. It's amazing that Gull was able to twist this somehow into him being irresponsible. So that I hadn't seen in a while. Boomeranging us back to Nick McClelland's April 20th, 2023 request for any and all records associated with Rick Allen and DOC. This request is made for the purpose of an investigation regarding murder. Thank you, Nick. Further, in response to the observations made by the investigating officer, okay, this could have been a page, this could have been an email, this could have been a page. You didn't have to do all this. Listen to how he concludes. This request is made for the purpose of an investigation regarding murder. Further, in response to the observations made by the investigating officer, the state believes that Richard Allen is a suspect in the criminal acts. The state believes the employment records would be able to confirm or support information that the law enforcement has acquired as a result of the murder investigation. This is some crazy. Hi, Travis. Welcome. Oh, they did drop it. Okay, I didn't. Yeah, of course. Like, how could they not? For them to even try and accuse Brad of being unethical for preserving his client's right. Get out of here. It's like they're personally offended when defendants assert their rights to due process. Is weird. They're personally offended by defense attorneys defending their client. So these are Yellow Jacket's very meticulous, incredible notes in typed form from the hearing, particularly from July 31st, the testimony of Walla. So when Rick entered the facility, he had a history of general anxiety disorder. Walla says yes. More severe anxiety when Rick is separated from his family. Is that true? Dr. Walla says yes. So codes A through E at Westville represent the stage of acuteness or severity of symptoms of an inmate. Rick was D the whole time. E equals psych ward. Which is interesting because if you are involuntarily medicating somebody with Haldol injections and they are gravely disabled, they're E. But they didn't want to classify him as E because that would mean that they would have to admit him into a psychiatric hospital facility for stabilization. Remember that time Rick was begging Dr. Walla to go to Logansport Hospital so that he could get better and see his family? That's pretty devastating. That's really sad. Rick was fragile when he was admitted. He was thrown into solitary and verbally taunted. Are there any records to indicate that he was suicidal at his intake? Remember, the prosecutor alleges this in April 2023 in a motion. He made statements at intake. There's no record to indicate that. But he was high risk due to charges. Rosie asks Walla, did you order suicide companions? And Walla says, no, nothing. From the very start, there were problems with Rick's companions. They talked to him about his case, which is a no. Inmates are suicide companions plus program companions are not allowed to talk to the inmate that they're providing companionship for. Rick told Dr. Walla that he was frustrated with the companions, and Walla agreed that they were untrustworthy. When Rick advised Dr. Walla that the companions were asking him questions, she didn't do anything about it. Walla says she doesn't love it, but it's the system. Me versus the system, says Dr. Walla. Companions are paid. A suicide companion is a paid position. So Rick was Dr. Walla's first ever pre-trial unconvicted patient. Sometimes they went down the hall for more involved sessions. Rick would sometimes go into a 3x3 cage, which is triangular concrete walls with a gate in front. She never did a therapeutic evaluation, but she did provide handouts on depression and anxiety. Dr. Walla provided Rick Allen with Man's Search for Meaning. She gave him crossword puzzles and crayons. Her abilities are super limited by admin and DOC, says Dr. Walla, contracted by the multi-billion-dollar Centurion Healthcare. We would talk about suicide to make sure they're safe. Ever talk to Rick about the exceptions to patient and doctor privilege and privacy? And Dr. Walla says, I don't think so. Oh, confidentiality and informed consent and HIPAA are at the forefront of Centurion's healthcare team, except we don't even inform the inmate that there's exceptions to confidentiality and patient-doctor privilege. So I build rapport and trust with my patient, and then I him forever by basically facilitating his self-incrimination. Did you ever get a waiver from Rick? She's like, I don't know. She technically works for Centurion. There have been a few switches over time. Every 3 years, the contracts renew. Rick proclaimed his innocence at the very beginning. He was focused on his wife and very worried about her. In December, he told her that he was being treated badly. December. So immediately, almost a month in. Per Dr. Walla's testimony, Allen took God into his heart on March 21st, 2023. Okay. That to me sounds like a religious delusion, but what do I know? I've not assessed him, although neither has Dr. Walla, apparently. So as he's taking God into his heart, he's in the same breath telling her, I don't feel right. According to Dr. Walla's testimony in March, Rick told her, I don't feel right, around the 21st. But he's also telling her on March 23rd, Rick Allen was depressed, Rick Allen was withdrawn, and he was not straight in the head. He's taking God into his heart. He's depressed, withdrawn, and not straight in the head. That to me sounds a lot like somebody who's experiencing mental health disturbance and distress. April 4th, Allen suffered from insomnia, hopelessness, suicidal, and said death would bring relief. April 4th, right? Well, that's literally the day or the day after he made this phone call to his wife. This was a rapid decline. Rapid. From March 21st until April 4th. And I still want to know, until somebody can prove otherwise, what the happened from the time Randy Jones became supervisor of APOD, where Rick was housed, late February, early March. What happened between late February, early March, and early April of 2023? What did they do to Rick Allen? So on 4/4, the day that he's feeling hopeless, the day after he makes this alleged confession to his wife, she characterizes him as poor, critical, deteriorating, suicidal ideation. Rick is having delusions. He says death would bring relief, insomnia, poor appetite, and hopelessness. Insomnia and poor appetite, doesn't that sound a lot like the grave disability thing we just read that talks about sometimes when people are experiencing psychosis, for whatever reason, they won't eat or sleep. It's not like a willful, defiant thing. On 4/12/23, his situation, he is more critical, banging his head on his cell, self-harm. They had to give him emergent involuntary medication via injection. 4/13, grave disability. Rick is consuming feces. They're considering involuntary medication. The 21st of April, Walla had a conversation with Rick about incompetency to stand trial. Why is the psychologist Yes, he was Rick Allen was Dr. Walla's lab rat, the DOC's lab rat. Dr. Walla, for some reason, the day after Nick tries to get Rick Allen's mental health records, frantically, he files 3 different motions and they're all flawed. They're all flawed. He's trying to get his mental health records really, really, really bad on March 20th. The day after that, Dr. Walla's like, hey, Rick, do you feel competent to stand trial? That ain't good. Okay, so the day after Nick frantically tries to get all of Rick's mental health records from DOC, Dr. Walla's like, maybe you're not competent to stand trial, which is interesting because Gull around the same time was like, hey, if you keep bringing up the issue of competency, I'm gonna end up giving the state his mental health records. And the defense was like, we literally never brought up competency. And she's like, you keep talking about his mental health. And they're like, yeah, because they're literally torturing him and trying to kill him. Like, what does that have to do with competency? If you ask me, I think there's some backdoor behind the scenes ex parte going on. Perhaps Dr. Walla needs to keep her mouth shut when it comes to how Rick should be. Maybe don't give your patient insight as to how he should defend himself from 2 murder charges. You absolute audacious. That's insane. Rick says, I want to confess on May 3rd. And she's like, I don't know if he's being truthful, which this is a really weird word. Like this to me just telegraphs the total lack of understanding and appreciation and appropriate level of knowledge and care that Walla is at least exhibiting towards severely mental ill patients. Because for Rick to say, I want to confess, and she questions if he's being truthful, that implies that he's being dishonest. Like that implies that he's lying, which is like so punitive. Everything in DOC is punitive. It's all punitive. So if you're experiencing symptoms of psychosis and they're resulting in you flooding your cell or throwing bodily fluids or refusing to eat or sleep because you're psychotic, DOC will treat that as a behavioral issue and they will respond in kind, meaning they will punitively address the issue, which is not the way that a mental health crisis need be addressed. So for Dr. Walla to say, I question if Rick was being truthful, you don't get it, girl. You have no business treating a severely mentally ill patient, much less a severely mentally ill patient who is in solitary confinement and restricted housing unit, which is inherently punitive. 5-3, I want to confess. 5-17, his disorganized thinking accelerated. Why? I get really, really, really upset when we talk about this because she documented. So in March, she's noticing something's not right. By April 4th, she describes him as critical. Okay, he's critical. He's deteriorating. He's suicidal, delusions. Death would bring relief. A week later, more critical. A day later, grave disability. 2 weeks later, a month later, disorganized thinking is accelerating. This right here is cruel and unusual punishment the courts have already decided this. So Judge Gull can delay the issue however long she wants to, but at the end of the day, the courts have already made the decision for her. You cannot deprive an individual in state custody, an inmate, you cannot deprive an inmate of mental health treatment. It's cruel and unusual punishment. It's violative of their constitutional rights. And for a month plus, she watched him accelerate and deteriorate in psychosis. And because they valued the safekeeping bullshit order, which was in itself unconstitutional, because they wanted Rick under their thumb so that they could force and coerce confessions out of him, they wanted him so bad under their control and surveillance 24/7 that they prioritized a bullshit illegal safekeeping order over getting a gravely disabled, severely mentally ill pre-trial defendant in psychosis who's worsening and deteriorating. They didn't get him any intervention. They didn't intervene and they didn't interrupt his psychosis. They allowed him to deteriorate to the point. Psychosis is like a brain injury. It's like injuring any other part of your body. Your brain it's an organ. It's susceptible to injury, and it can be permanently altered and damaged by prolonged psychotic reaction to stress, by psychosis. It's like beyond the pale what has occurred in a state facility at the hands of state actors. And it's documented. There is a good reason Judge Gull is holding on, white knuckling those transcripts of Dr. Wallace's testimony, because you know what else? It's not just Dr. Wallace's ass that's in hot water. It's not just Centurion's ass that's in hot water. It's not just the other doctors that were in that April hearing whose ass are in hot water. It's not just the OC that's going to be in trouble and the prosecutor. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, the warden, whatever. Judge Gull allowed her bias to completely blind her to the evidence that the defense provided and put in front of her twice. They filed an emergency safekeeping order in April. She scheduled a due process hearing 2 months later. Either the sheriff lied or the judge lied. We still don't have clarification on that, but somebody lied. But one of them intentionally prevented the defense's witness, an inmate, whistleblower, Baston, who people discredit because he's a piece of shit. Okay. What about the state's witnesses, who are all pieces of shit by that standard, right? The rules don't apply. But Judge Gull twice issued orders on safekeeping that kept Rick in a detention environment that violated his due process rights and that consisted of cruel and unusual punishment. Period. You just listened to 8 hours of testimony from the psychologist, vacated the safekeeping order, and now you're trying to hide the testimony from the public. Defense attorneys told the judge that DOC failed to provide Allen adequate mental health care during that time. Oh, I just said this. They prioritized his status as a safekeeper who had to be monitored around the clock and in isolation rather than following department guidelines that require inmates, especially those with severe mental illness, from being housed in isolation longer than 30 days. He was in isolation for 19 goddamn months. 19 months. This comes down to whether actions by the state constitute an interrogation and whether he had a right to have his attorneys present under the Sixth Amendment. This prison psychologist assigned to treat Richard Allen while he served at Westville testified that she had long been fascinated by the Delphi murders and that she and her boyfriend traveled to Delphi so they could visit the crime scene and stand on the Monon High Bridge prior to learning of Allen's arrest. Nice. Dr. Wallace said she frequently listens to true crime podcasts about Delphi during her commute to Westville. And she's commented on social media about which of the podcasts she recommends. She also admitted that she used her IDOC-issued computer to research other people mentioned as having possible involvement in the murders. Wallace testified that she also spoke with Allen about the positive comments that she's read online from his supporters. Asked by Rosie if her actions presented a conflict of interest and ethical problems, she responded, "I disagree." Well, there you go. You have no business being here. While the climate is improving inside the courtroom, Rosie could not catch a break outside the courthouse. He left Tuesday's hearing to discover Carroll County law enforcement had issued him a parking ticket for parking along the courthouse square for more than 2 hours. Nice. Disorganized thinking accelerated. There's a deposition, page 177 is shown to her. Rick on 5/18 is in a vegetative state of depression. On 5/22, he's having a psychotic reaction to stress. This is a diagnosis. This is a diagnosis. Rick was diagnosed with psychosis. We're going to get to Judge Gull's, speaking of delusion, we're going to get to Judge Gull's order in a second. But Rick was diagnosed by a psychologist, the lead psychologist at Westville Correctional Facility. In June 2023, his depression is at its peak. He's experiencing physiological symptoms of his acute grave disability, his severe mental illness. Physiological symptoms, trembling, stuttering, knees buckling, eyes bulging. Oh, but by July, after the safekeeping hearing, when the world put eyes on him for the first time in months and said, holy shit, this man looks like he's terminally ill. Some signs of restoration. They're still having cage sessions in October. Rick is proclaiming his innocence, but he's already sentenced. So Rick spent about April, May, June, July, we don't know, 2 to 4 months experiencing psychosis. He comes out of it he's signs of restoration, whatever that means. He'll probably never be the same, but he's certainly not restored to his wellness that he was before this. But in October, he's proclaiming his innocence, but he's already sentenced. Is it possible that he didn't know that he hadn't actually been sentenced yet? So 12 inmates out of 3,000 get regular injections at Westville. In November, Rick is still being taunted and harassed by other inmates. He had a break, like a psychotic break, a psychotic process occurring in March and June. Diagnosis of psychotic, catatonic, disorganized speech, serious mental illness. These are all verbatim from Dr. Walla's notes. Rosie says he was sent there for his safety, right? As a doctor, don't you agree he met the criteria for severe mental illness? And she says, no doubt. And yet the court says you're safe here. Serious mental illness, 30 days solitary confinement max per Indiana code. Walla acknowledges this, and that's because of the known documented effects of solitary confinement. Rosie says, well, there's exceptions to that, right? If the inmate is an extreme danger to others, and Walla says, not Rick. Like, nope, that doesn't describe him at all. Rick was in solitary confinement for 12 months. Walla says, yes. Rosie begins to question her about the IPAC versus IDOC settlement lawsuit that we've talked about that expired the day before the hearing for his military medication. Diener says, I object. That's not relevant. And Rosie says, this case is when those policies were born. He provides an offer of proof. Gull allows it. Shame on you, DOC. You violated rights. Rosie hands Walla a document refreshing her on exceptions to confidentiality. Rick was not informed of this exception. I'm going to stop here, though, for Walla tonight because it's a lot. I'm tired.